Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be looking at making our own wooden dice. So this is very easy to make. Basically you just need a plank of wood, and the size of the plank can vary in size depending on how big or how small you want your dice to be. To make this you will need a jigsaw and a belt sander. The belt sander is optional, but we are going to be making a lot of use of it to get the shape of the dice right and to make the edges nice and smooth. Lastly, you will need some way to clamp down the wood when we do saw it and when we do our sanding. I'm using this device that basically helps me clamp the wood by pressing down a pedal at the bottom that holds the wood steady in place for me to work on. Once we've got our wood nice and secured, we firstly need to take our measurements. I'm using a thumb's length as a guide to basically get the shape of the dice correct, because this is the same as the thickness of the plank of wood I am working with. I will be making use of a tape measure to get exact measurements of the dice and make sure that they are uniform. I'm also using the straight edge to basically just check that the wood is straight before we do any cuts. Now that we have our measurements for the dice's width, I'm going to use the straight edge to draw a line through the entire piece of wood that we can use as a guide as we cut our dice. While making these measurements, I actually saw that the piece of wood was warped on the one side. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut off the first section of the dice and basically just throw that away so that we know we are on a level edge before we start cutting our actual dice. It is important to note that when we are using the jigsaw, that the blade's thickness will actually cut off that piece of wood and we will lose that size. So for these dice we will be going on the inside edge of the lines that we drew. Basically I'm just showing here the piece of wood that we will cut off, seeing as the outer edge of the wood was warped. With that piece of wood out of the way, we can actually start cutting our dice and getting our measurements. While I'm taking these measurements, it might be a good time to ask if you enjoy woodworking content to please subscribe and hit that like, as it helps the channel and keeps it going in the long run. And with that cut, our first dice is complete, and we'll just do the same for the second one. I was quite happy with the result, with each of our dice being exactly the same size. Because we used the jigsaw to cut our dice, they basically leave quite a hard surface that we need to sand down before we can start sanding the edges. I did this process for both dices and held them together to make sure that they are uniform once I've done sanding them down. With the dices now nice and smooth, we need to start making the shape of the dices, basically sanding down the edges and the corners to get that dice shape. With this process done, we can see that our dices now have the correct dice shape and are uniform with each other. The next step is putting the numbers on the dice, and we will be using a drill for this step. Here we can see the result of drilling the number 1 on a dice, giving it a nice 3D look rather than just drawing on the dice with a pen. We will now repeat this process for the remainder of the dice. Our last step now is just to sand down the dice with a fine grained sandpaper, just to give it that nice finished look. And here we can finally see our dice in action, and we rolled a snake eyes on our first roll. So from this point forward you can varnish the dice or give them a coat of paint, but I like this look and will keep them as is. So that does it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.